I often ask myself what my favourite video game is, and frankly, I don't know the answer. There are so many meaningful RPGs, so many influential open worlds, and so many platformers that formed my childhood love of games. 1 hour I answer Stellar Glow, the next Spyro the Dragon, and the next Ghost of Tsushima. The most recent addition to the list was Tales of Arise, a truly amazing JRPG that I'm gagging to play again, but unfortunately, that's for another day. Today then is the day for me to speak on the game, or rather game series, I have played the most in my time on this planet. From my first purchase in the series, Pro Cycling Manager 2012, to the most recent entry, Pro Cycling Manager 2022, I have spent a cumulative 3,740 hours in game, according to my Steam stats. This number has risen since this review started. You can comfortably add another 100 hours for the time I used to spend creating my own databases in the editor, in my younger years, and even more for the older titles I bought beforehand, before I had a Steam account. In short, I'm a big fan, and year on year I sink my time back into the grueling world of pro cycling management. I actually remember the very day I became a fan of cycling as a spectator sport. I just returned from a 3-day Duke of Edinburgh silver level camping/hiking expedition and was staying at my grandmother's house for one night before heading on holiday with family the day after. And that day there just happened to be something on the television. A review of the 2010 Tour de France, airing a few days after the tour had officially finished. I was on the edge of my seat as I watched some of the best cyclists of all time throwing their all at one another. Fabian Cancellara's iconic time trialling, Mark Cavendish's unsurmountable speed in the sprints, the race for the yellow jersey between two of the most exciting cyclists to watch of all time, Alberto Contador and Andy Schleck, and the race between Denis Menchov and Samuel Sanchez for the podium was just as exciting. In cycling, it doesn't matter whether you look at who came first or who came 13th. There is a story to be told, and more often than not, it's a story worth listening to. This brief layover fired something up inside, and as any good video game liker would, I had a look on the internet to see if any games related to the world of pro cycling were being made. And to my luck, there were. Cyanide Studios have been pumping out yearly editions of this series since 2001, alongside some other notable titles such as the Blood Bowl series and the Tour de France series, a side series that focuses more on the control of an individual cyclist rather than the management of a whole squad. And from 2010 onwards, I was truly hooked on cycling. Whenever I could, I would watch races on Eurosport and would follow all the top level races with a keen eye. I even ran a moderately successful cycling blog when I was in college before depression kicked that little venture into touch. But not just as a gamer, but as a severely overweight and frankly lazy man, the idea of me competing in even amateur cycling events was more than just far-fetched. Pro Cycling Manager, as a series, has been a perfect outlet for me to indulge in a life I was never born to lead. And today, as a treat for all of you watching, I'm going to tell you why Pro Cycling Manager 2022 is the best entry into the series yet, and why you should give it a try. Right. It's quite hard to comment on the critical reception of the game, as there isn't really much of a critical reception to talk about. The series hasn't garnered enough reviews to receive a Metacritic average since 2018, and I could only find one proper review of the 2022 version. This was courtesy of Life is Xbox, and they awarded the game 7 out of 10, citing that the core experience is still as fun as ever, but lamented the lack of changes the game has, comparing the game unfavourably to the 2019 edition. Looking at Steam reviews, the game is hovering at mostly positive, and this is consistent with almost every other edition of the yearly game. Basically, this game is niche. It's a management sim of a sport that isn't football, and the cross-section of video game fans and cycling fans pales in comparison to those who grew up with FIFA and Championship Manager, so this is to be expected. Over my time, I've tried tennis managers, basketball managers, baseball managers, and no game outside of Pro Cycling Manager and Football Manager have proven to be the addictive, hard-to-put-down experience that management game fans crave, although the upcoming F1 Manager 2022 release is likely to slot in nicely to this list. Basically, I wanted to make a deep dive review on this game and series because it is niche and close to my heart. So, without further ado, let's jump into the gameplay. Onto the gameplay, and just beforehand, note I am using a real name database. This changes the names of the riders to match their real life counterparts and updates the stats of riders periodically. I also have a mod which increases the variety of stages available for each race. And it makes the season-on-season career mode more inviting, but the game is just as good without these options being taken. Also, for the first time ever, I am playing on the extreme difficulty. I play on easy in many games, but after thousands of hours of practice across multiple titles, I feel comfortable challenging this game at its hardest. And the experience you get when you understand the systems deeply is almost intoxicating. If you're just starting out, there's no shame in learning on easy, as the number of simultaneous systems you have to manage can be overwhelming, but that's what this section is here to explain. Anyway, on we go. An individual race in cycling is called a stage. Many races are made up of multiple stages, i.e. a stage race. A stage can take various guises, but the winner is the one who crosses the line first. To make sure that rider is one of your own, you need to understand the stats behind the riders and the mechanics of controlling them. Let's go through the basic mechanical controls first. In race, if you click on one of your rider's names, you are given a number of symbols. These symbols tell your rider what to do and are extremely important when engaging in the stage-to-stage races. Here is a brief look at each of the important ones. Stay. Stay in roughly the same position in the peloton. I usually set the number for this about 85 because usually, as you're unlikely to be dropped from a group with this number, and you aren't wasting energy by setting over the 85 energy threshold. I'll speak more about that later, but 85 is the number which sets you don't tend to lose much energy, but if you set it higher you can burn energy very, very fast. A number too low, however, can lead to you getting dropped, so be very, very careful that the number isn't too low here. Relay. You use this with your teammate riders or if your rider is in a breakaway. This rider works with others to increase the pace of the group you're in. The burden of pace in the peloton usually falls to the race favourites or the rider holding the leader's jersey. Use this to stop breakaway riders stealing your victories, or if you are a breakaway rider, use it to work with the other riders who are with you and then hopefully beat them later on. Protect. This commands a rider to sit in front of another, protecting him from the wind and helping him preserve precious energy. To avoid burning out the best teammates, I tend to protect my strongest rider with my weakest and change them out as the teammate becomes weaker. This is a crucial mechanic and shows how strong teamwork can be in cycling. Set a pace. The rider progresses forward at a set pace. Anything above 85 burns both of the bars quite quickly, so only use in the dying embers of a stage. I usually use this to reposition riders in the large group or to set a pace after attacking the best riders. Speaking of which, an attack. This puts in a big show of power to try and leave your rivals in your dust. This burns energy fast, but sometimes, especially in the mountains, you need to give all you've got to create time between you and your rivals. If you don't find yourself leaving other riders behind, change your tactics and wait until the other riders are more tired. And water. Commands the rider to get water for the rest of the team. It's very, very useful, but it can catch you out if you're not paying attention. Make sure you send a non-leader, one of your not-so-good riders, to do this, and that you do this before the water bottle changes from blue to grey. If it starts flashing, get water ASAP, because otherwise your leader goes back and wastes energy doing so. So these are the basic controls in the stage-to-stage gameplay. There are loads of tactical wrinkles to talk about as we move forward, but for now we're going to lean into the Anorak side of things by diving balls deep into stats. Stats. Each team has between 10 and 30 riders. Each rider has stats. Let's go through each very, very briefly. Flat shows the rider's ability to ride fast on the flatlands. Mountain shows the rider's ability to climb the big mountains, a must for stage races. Hill shows the rider's ability to climb short hills, a must for those chasing classics and individual stage wins. Time trial shows the rider's ability in a time trial. Prologue shows the rider's ability in a short time trial. Cobblestone shows the rider's ability to ride across uneven surfaces. Not the most common stage, but a specialty that can bring you many classic wins early in the season. Sprint shows the rider's ability to ride fast at the end of a stage. It's the top speed they can achieve. Acceleration shows the rider's ability to accelerate, how fast they reach that maximum velocity. Downhill shows how fast the rider can descend. Baroudeur, a French word, shows how often the rider is likely to attack. A stat that can be a little hard to read, but riders who have a high stat here often excel in other categories as well. Stamina shows the max energy of the rider. Higher stamina is a real godsend in the big races. Resistance shows how long a rider can maintain an effort, crucial for the Tour de France and other big 3-week races. Recovery shows how well a rider recovers from stage to stage, again crucial for the big 3-week races like the Tour de France. One of the best things about rider stats in Pro Cycling Manager is the gap between the very best and a mid-tier rider isn't completely insurmountable. Sure, Tadej Pogacar with his 82 mountain stat is likely to beat Andreas Regnarsson's 74 upper peak more often than not, but with the right tactics, and I have done this in this game, you can cause an upset. This feels balanced extremely well, and in the 2022 version in particular, the results do feel a little more random than before, and considering how difficult real-life cycling results can be to predict, this is just a truly excellent change. But races are decided by more than just those stats. There is still one more area which determines how fast your rider can go. RDC, the race day condition, and fitness. I think you could make a strong argument that race day condition and fitness are more important than the stats themselves. Whilst this can be toggled on and off in the menus for the stage race mode, and the RDC can be set as 0 by default, the combination of fitness, daily fitness buffs and debuffs, as well as the stats, creates a far more unpredictable and interesting group of riders. Let's use an example. Let's take Romain Bardet. In this example, he has a fitness of 74% and an RDC of -2. Because his fitness is a long way from the peak of 100%, his RDC is much likely to be in the minuses. The RDC actively affects the stats a rider has, and the higher the number, the bigger the change. Chances are his main stats will not be lower than normal in this case, his mountain stat having a red minus mark next to it, and an intimidating red number. Personally, I find an RDC of 5, and by proxy -5, can be a little too large and provide results that are way too wildly different to provide a consistent fun experience. It can be fun to see the massive changes a good fitness can make, but I tend to set the maximum as -3. Feel free to experiment with this, as it really does make a big difference to how the game feels. Let's use a positive example with the same rider. Let's say Bardet is coming to his peak fitness and is at 97%. He turns up on the day and his RDC is +4. Expect the rider to have a substantial jump in all of his important stats. I find +3 and above changes are really felt, with resistance and recovery stats getting all important buffs that can be the difference to a Tour de France stage win and another defeat. There is also a tiredness stat that comes into play in career mode that is much more difficult to manage than in previous iterations. This makes the balancing of your rider's schedule far more important than before, so they don't become burnt out, but I'll try and cover that a little bit more when we get to the career section later on. Now we understand how the stats of each rider works, let's talk about how you can actually start winning races. Tactics and ways to win. Big shocker, Pro Cycling Manager 2022 is a management sim. As standard, you are in control of a team of cyclists and engage in a number of races, and of course, your aim is to win them. I'm going to take you through one of each type of stage and explain the basics and how they differ and how your tactics should differ with each. First, I'm going to give you a very brief lesson on cycling. I probably should have done it at the start, but I'm going to do it now. Cycling stages are split into multiple categories, and so are the cyclists. Sprinters excel in flat stages and live for mass sprints at the end of a long trip. These flat stages are probably the most common stage in game, but each has a unique layout that has its own challenges. Some of these stages also expose riders to areas of strong wind that can make this stage less about sprinting and more about a rider who's strong in the flat and Baroudeur stats. Even the most unremarkable stage can become something special that demands your attention. A puncher is a rider who loves short, sharp hills. Anything between 1 kilometre and 5 kilometre is the territory for these riders. The riders tend to have a high hill stat along with a high acceleration and a respectable sprint. Hilly stages really do vary, as some might have some large ascent mid-stage before ending flat, whereas others may be predominantly flat but end on a short, steep climb. In the big stage races, these stages can give you crucial seconds if you play your cards right. Many of the one-day classics are hilly stages, so they are very, very important to learn. Cobblestone stages are an outlier. They can be completely flat or can be a constant slog of ascents and descents. The key here is for certain sections of the road that forego tarmac and instead find the riders traversing uneven, cobbled roads. Funnily enough, the cobblestone stat is important here, but I find fitness and resistance is as crucial. These stages truly sap the rider's energy, and managing that bar is far more difficult in this rendition than in previous. Managing your attacks are the key here, but this is one of the few occasions where the best usually do prosper. Individual time trials, these stages play completely different as you manage just one individual rider's effort across a distance between 0 and 50 kilometres. Short prologue time trials use the prologue stat, whereas longer time trials use the aptly named time trial stat. Shorter time trials usually require a high energy effort over the 85 threshold, whereas time trials require a delicate balance of each of the decreasing bars and choosing the right moment to increase the rider's effort above the threshold and reduce the red bar in the process. These are far more difficult than in previous games, and I am still adjusting. This change has made the fairly simple time trials of yore into a bit more of a challenge, so I'm not against this, but I can't proclaim to be an expert right now either. Mountain stages. The piste de résistance, which sounds terrible coming from my mouth, but the piste de résistance. The most fun I have in these games is challenging the iconic climbs of the cycling world. Racing up Alpe d'Huez or the perilous Angliru with the Tour or Vuelta on the line is what every season in career is building up to. A high mountain stat is a must, but the resistance stat also comes into play here. Recovery is key for the stage that follows, because many of these stages contain a lot of climbing and can drain your rider's stamina reserves quicker than you'd like. These are the basics for each, but now I'm going to try and give you some hints on how to win each type of stage. Flat stages and the basic controls and mechanics of them. I think flat stages are the most common stages in the game. Flat doesn't mean that there are no hills or elevation changes, but that the elevation changes and hills are so minor that the riders with a low hill stat should still be able to make it to the finish in the lead group. The most standard way to win is with a bunch sprint. Having a rider with a high sprint and acceleration stat is key for this, with a high flat rating also being of use. You can win these stages by breaking away early, but this is more hit and miss, and is dependent on the overall classification of the race letting you go, and a bit of luck. The main way to win a sprint is to create something called a sprint train. You can do this by clicking the icon that looks like the less than button and an S. The rider at the front of the train should set a high cadence, and the other riders should stick behind him. This preserves their energy as they are slipstreaming the lead rider. The key to a sprint train is putting your weaker riders at the front and burning their energy with an effort above 85. Once their energy is depleted, change the rider setting the pace until you reach the final riders. Ideally, you should have 2 riders in front of your main sprinter at 5 km to go. I find if you sprint from 2 km out, you might run out of energy before reaching the finish, or it might be perfect. It depends on the route of the day, and you need to work out when best to send your rider. When you get to this stage, send your rider and see what they can do. These stages can become chaotic depending on the route, as some layouts have thin roads that lead to crashes, tailbacks, and the breaking up of your train. Do you go as fast as possible for clean air but leave yourself vulnerable by burning through your team too quickly? Do you forego a train and instead try and follow the stage favourite? Do you try and catch the AI off guard and sprint early? Despite being arguably the most vanilla stage the game has to offer, there is enough tactical variety to keep these races engaging. The best rider doesn't always win, so player skill really does shine through here. I have found it easier to win with a lower stat wielding sprinter than a lower stat wielding climber, so you really can cause some upsets in these stages. These stages would be my recommendation for a new player playing their first stage of the game, as they are probably the easiest to understand. Hilly stages are difficult to manage. If they end with a short sprint up a hill, setting up a small sprint train with your key rider in third position is probably the best port of call. Attacking early can also pay dividends here, as it can catch other riders off guard. However, if the stage is hilly but ends with a downhill or a flat sprint, attacking early is often a good option. A rider like Wout van Aert, who has an absurdly high sprint and hill stat, has the luxury to wait for a sprint or attack the opposition, but unless you're controlling him, you might have to be clever with your tactics to outwit the opposition. In the larger stage races, breakaways can often prosper in these stages, as the riders fighting for the general classification watch over each other and allow the breakaway a huge time gap. This actually happened once in my career mode with Team DSM in the Benelux Tour, and it cost me the GC win because of it. It shows that even after 10 years of these games, I'm still making stupid mistakes that are avoidable. Cobblestone stages are probably the hardest type of stage in the game, in my not humble opinion. Even more so than previous games, they are more difficult. Most cobblestone stages have only a few short sections, which means a mix of cobbled specialists and sprinters will make it to the end. I have found success by putting an attack in a long way out, but when you get to the two big cobblestone races, the Paris-Roubaix and the Ronde van Vlaanderen, only the best will win. If you win one of these races on the higher difficulties with a rider with a cobbled stat below 76, you are a far better player than me. I find myself chasing the top 10 on these stages in my career instead of the win itself, but a lack of success doesn't make this any less fun. And this does bring up a key point. In many races, a top 10 can feel as good as a win, especially when you're playing with a lower rated team. Picking up wins in the smaller races, knocking in a consistent top 10, and then picking up some solid surprises on the way as well, is what makes cycling management such a joy. Individual and team time trials are very much stat dependent, but I believe that the RDC is probably the most crucial part here, even more so than in the normal stage-to-stage gameplay. The best time trials do tend to come to the fore, but because the system for these stages is completely different to the standard stage, fitness of individual riders and the RDC is even more important. The key here is using your lesser riders early in the stage to find the optimum energy balance. Push one rider as high as 80, for example, and then the next as low as 65, and monitor how their energy wanes. Usually the time trial specialists do win these stages, but many mountaineers have high stats here as well, as they target the stage races like the Tour de France. Here, more than ever, not losing time is more important than winning. Try and match your rivals and take whatever you can get. Mountain stages. These are a tactical smorgasbord. If you watched this year's Tour de France, you would have seen Tadej Pogačar sending out a big attack on almost every mountain, and if you wish, you can do that too. Breakaways provide an important tactical option in these stages. You can chase the stage win, or you can put a weaker rider ahead in the breakaway to later drop back and use as a teammate to help your leader to catch later. Your leader can wait until the final climb to challenge his rivals, or you can channel your Pogačar and attack early in the pursuit of a large win. Watch the energy carefully though, because if you run out, you'll be losing not just seconds on your rivals, but more likely minutes. These stages are the most important in the big races like the Tour de France and the Giro d'Italia, where managing your reserves over multiple consecutive mountain passes becomes the key. That does raise the question though, what is the difference between these stage races I've been banging on about and the classic one-day races, and how should your tactics vary for each? Good question, friends. Good question. Classics versus Tours. This might seem a bit basic, but a classic is the top of the top when it comes to one-day races. Races like Il Lombardia and Milan-San Remo are amongst the most prestigious one-day races, but I tend to refer to all one-day races as classics. This is factually wrong, but it's less wordy than saying one-day races. Classics are where most of the cobbled stages reside, and they are well placed throughout the season. These races are good one-and-done stages. When competing in the lower level ones, it can be a good opportunity for your lesser riders to have a chance of a fabled top 10, or maybe even a win. Tours require a different approach. In most, the winner will be the one who tackles the difficult stages the best. Although some tours are heavy on sprints, most have at least one hill, mountain or time trial stage to create significant time gaps between the leaders. You don't need to win every stage in a race to end up as champion, with the cumulative time across the stages being the key to success. You can finish 140th in every flat stage, but finish on the same time as the stage winner. Mountain stages are where the real time gaps occur, and where tours are usually decided. Recovery between stages in the big races like the Tour de France, so be careful not to be too aggressive in attacks unless your rider has Pogacar-esque recovery. But, as always, it seems there are ways to win in cycling without being the first across the line. Winning by not winning. In a stage race, the man in the leader's jersey is the man who has the shortest time across the entire race. In the Tour de France, this is the yellow jersey. However, in the same races, there are different competitions going on for each type of rider. First of all, the sprint jersey. In the Tour de France, this is the green jersey. Each stage has one or more intermediate sprint point. These points are also handed out at the end of every stage. The man with the most points in these sprints at the end of the race wins the jersey. Traditionally, this is the competition that sprinters target, and many Brits will think of the heroics of Mark Cavendish as he sprints his way to the win and finally the jersey. Wout van Aert has won this year's green jersey in the modern Tour de France, and modern riders can get up more lumpy terrain like Van Aert, and they can be very difficult to beat stage on stage if your sprinter can't do that. To help sprinters win these competitions, flat stages usually give out more points than hilly ones, at least in the Tour de France, but Van Aert's heroics show how difficult these competitions can be to win. Next, the mountains classification. In Tour de France, this is the polka dot jersey. Across a stage, you may see a climb with a number between 4 and 1 above it. Sometimes you'll even see HC. This is the category of climb. 4 is the lowest category that awards the lowest number of points. 3 is harder and 2 harder still. Category 1 climbs are very difficult, and all category, HC climbs, are rare but hand out boatloads of points, as well as being devilishly hard. Whilst GC riders can end up with these competitions through winning lots of mountain stages, attacking riders can claim the jersey by timing breakaways well. Sometimes wearing the jersey for one stage can be important as winning it outright for a team, so taking risks in this competition can be critical, and well worth it, especially if you think you'll struggle to reach the top 10 in the yellow contest. The under 25 classification is far simpler. In the Tour de France, this is the white jersey. Every rider under 25 is classified in the contest. It is the same as the yellow jersey race, except for young riders. This can be hard to win early on in career when Tadej Pogacar, one of the best stage racers in the world, is still only 23, and that young talent seems to be popping up everywhere these days. There's one more contest, but I'll be honest, I rarely focus on it. It's the teams competition. Basically, the game takes the top 3 riders in each team, adds the times together, and the lowest combined time wins. There's no jersey here, but it does give you some prize money in the career, and that can be helpful. That wraps up the aim in each race that you'll be aiming for, and we're almost at the end of the gameplay section, at least. Before we move on, however, I'd like to chat a little about the stamina management side of the races, how this has improved on previous iterations, and how important it is to winning. Stamina management and managing the bars below the rider's name are what makes this game truly challenging. Never before has the yellow bar run out so quickly on me during a stage than in this game, and it demands much more clever riding than ever before. If your rider's heart rate is above 160, you'll find the bar draining steadily. When it gets above 170, which it should be when you're trying to win a mountain stage, the bar will drain very fast, often along with the red bar, which is to monitor the individual energy, such as a small burst of energy from an attack, whereas the yellow energy signifies the energy available for the day as a whole. If this bottoms out, you're in big trouble, so use teammates wisely and watch for bars so you have a chance of winning. And finally, that is pretty much everything in the race gameplay covered. I could have gone into more detail, but that's probably enough for a starter. Now it's time to talk about the modes that bring the day-to-day action together. Back on the bike, lads. Career mode. This is where the meat of the game lies. You pick a team from one of the 3 divisions, CYA World Tour, the Continental Pro Tour, and then the Continental Tour itself. From personal experience, I tend to pick a mid-tier world-level team to manage. There is fun to be had from building up a small team to become a stalwart in the upper echelons of cycling, but I find that, especially with a team like Team DSM, who I've been playing as in this review, being a team that can compete in the well-known races but very rarely have a rider who's among the favourites is a challenging position to be in, and it's where I draw most of my joy. Occasionally I do start up a career with one of the big three teams, that them being Jumbo-Visma, Ineos and Team UAE Emirates, and attempt to win all three big tours in one season, the Giro d'Italia, the Tour de France and the Vuelta a España. But for this footage at least, you'll be seeing me from my Team DSM save. So yeah, career mode puts you in charge of the team of your choice, and you have to manage your team of 30 or so cyclists for a number of seasons and attempt to become a legend of the cycling managing world. As the season begins, you're immediately thrown in at the deep end and given a heap load of prep work to be done before you engage in any racing. You have to decide the rough fitness level for your riders for the pre-season campaign, decide which races the team will enter, which riders will enter them, outlining their individual objectives for the season ahead. There are some smaller things to tinker with here as well, but for now let's focus on the calendar. Depending on your team's level, you can enter a certain group of races. For example, as a World Tour team, my team is obliged to enter all of the top level World Tour races. The Continental Pro and Continental level races are available, and you should certainly enter more than a few of them to ensure your riders get an equal level of races per season, and to act as fitness gaining races for your better riders. The pro cycling world might be best known for the Tour de France, but Grand Tours, of which the Tour de France is one, number only 3. There are many different prizes for cyclists to vie for throughout the season, be it one-day classics like the Milan-San Remo and Paris-Roubaix, or prestigious one-week races like the Paris-Nice and the deviously challenging Tour of the Basque Country. Choosing which race to enter depends on your team and rider specialties, and this is very much something worth thinking about when planning a season. After picking which races to visit, you should head to the schedule page to plan the team composition for each of these events. This pencils in this rider for participation, although it isn't set in stone until you reach the first stage of the race itself. When planning a season, keep in mind that the more races a rider rides in, the more their fatigue will tend to increase. You can't expect any cyclists, even the Wout van Aerts of this world, to be at their best all season long, and managing their fitness and goals is a key part of this process. I'll be honest, this section can be a bit dull, but it is crucial for the preparation of the next 50 or so hours of gameplay. Putting in just 1 hour of work is really worth it in the long run, and I actually look forward to it these days, just sticking on some music and choosing which riders to put my trust in where. You can skip this part and decide which riders will ride on the day of the race itself, but this means that managing their fitness is much more difficult. And for fitness being arguably more important than the base abilities, I wouldn't recommend it. However, in this edition the game has included an auto-scheduling option, and whilst this is far better than I had thought it to be, there is something to be gained from planning out the whole year for your team personally, especially the first time you play the game. The system that is in place for planning the year is surprisingly elegant, and utilises a drag and drop system that spans the entire season's calendar, and allows you to quickly and easily evaluate which riders to send to races as leaders and which are like to be stuck in a teammate role. This is the meat of the management side of the game, and I find myself bashing it out at the earliest opportunity. You can also go to the objectives menu and edit each rider's target for the season individually. Again, for fitness you should probably align these objectives with whichever you've decided they're scheduled to be for the season ahead. And then finally, you're just a couple of days away from your first race of your management career. Progress time forward a little and you'll likely be pressed to engage in the equipment upgrade system, something that after 10 years with the game I rarely see the need to engage in properly, but I'm sure there is some sort of benefit here. And also the scouting system. The scouting system is probably the biggest change that the 2022 edition of the game has brought with it, upgrading the old archaic system of scouting young riders and employing a more football manager-esque approach. You employ the scouts, choose what part of the world you want them to be exploring and wait for them to do their magic. Bear in mind that scouting here is exclusively used for the game-generated riders, as you can see all the stats of all the other riders in the game by default to begin with. This is a massive step up from previous games where you had to essentially guess your way through the signing of new riders from the examining of results of the very limited under-23 calendar. The scouts easily find a wide array of potential riders, and you can scout them further to discover their potential stats and what they already possess. It is harder than I expected to find a world beater, but this feature really is a step up on what the game has lumbered fans with for the previous 10 years. But after all this planning is over, the season begins in earnest. As I have a couple of Australian riders on my team, the race we begin with is the Australian Road Race Championship. Although no more than a coincidence, this race is a great one to start with because the profile is challenging, and with you likely to have no more than a couple of riders in the race, it allows the player to become familiar with what tactics are likely to work and which aren't. I'm not going to go through each race in the season, that would be crazy and take 30, 40, 50 hours to go through. I don't want to bore you for that long. But I will take you through a couple just to give you the flavour of the experience and show how your attachment to the riders and your team can quickly grow as you play the game. The UAE Tour is a pro level race, but it's in the B tier of the pro level. All the top teams usually still do participate, but they don't hold the same prestige and prizes as the A tier races. This race is made up of 4 flat sprint stages and 3 hilly stages. There's no mountain stages or time trials here, but the 3 hilly stages act as summit finishes, and one of the stages ends in a steep 11km climb, which is essentially a mountain, so there is something on offer for the GC riders as well as for sprinters. In this race I was giving my top sprinter Alberto Dainese and my main GC hope Romain Bardet their first races of the season. I went in with modest expectations as some of the best riders in the world were in attendance. I would have been happy to take a top 10 overall, with a couple of high finishes on stages. A stage win would be a nice bonus and a little bit of a surprise considering the stage of the season and my rider's fitness. Stage 1 was an awkward sprint, with my second sprinter and lead out man Sam Welsford actually finishing 4th and Dainese only 7th. Still, he beat some top level sprinters and it's a good result at this stage of the season. Stage 2, however, was even better. Romain Bardet showed his class. It's truly permanent, even though his fitness is some way from the peak. He rode on the wheel of his young protege Thymen Arensman and attacked with a few hundred metres to go, winning the stage. No time gaps were created here though, so it doesn't do much good for Bardet in terms of the overall classification, but it's really nice to take a stage win. Stage 3 was a much steeper sprint up a hill, and the Tour favourite Pogačar took the stage and 13 seconds on everyone else. Arensman and Bardet finished 13 seconds down in the second group, Bardet just hanging in there while Arensman looked the stronger of the two. Both still in contention going forwards. At stage 4 was another sprint and another top 10 for Dainese. He came 4th in a tough sprint and his lead out man finished 6th. The guys at the front just seem a little bit sharper than Dainese at the moment, but he's up there every day and his fitness will benefit from this. Stage 5 was the final GC stage on paper and had a pretty steep climb at the end. Bardet lost time to the leaders here, with Jonas Vingegaard taking the stage win and the lead overall. Bardet lost 33 seconds on him here, and it seemed to condemn Bardet to top 5 overall, which is bang on target, but it is slightly disappointing considering how the stage was progressing. Arensman also being in the top 10 is a plus. Stage 6, however, was a big shock, and just goes to show how unpredictable cycling can be. Dainese sprinted into 8th, which is a fine if underwhelming finish, but it was less that story and more the fact that Bardet gained time on all of his rivals, thanks to crosswinds. So I haven't spoken about crosswinds yet, but when the wind gets high, in this case 40 miles an hour, it can cause gaps in the peloton. If you manage to create a train and ride hard, other riders can struggle to hold your wheel and you can gain time on them. And this is exactly what we did here. This gave Bardet the overall lead of the race by a second. I was very lucky here as I didn't notice the wind until about 25 kilometres from the finish. It gave us just enough time to create a long enough sprint train with Bardet at the back instead of the sprinter. I would have liked a stronger sprint from Dainese, but it was such a frantic stage that you can't really hold this against him, and the team still won out on the day. The final stage now is it was pretty good. Dainese's best sprint of a race in third. Bardet finished safely in the group to win the GC. We come away from a race with a stage win and the overall GC. Arensman did drop down to 11th, not on any time, but because he finished further back on count back of places. But it's still a good result for the team's second leader. Winning this race was beyond my expectations, and it goes to show how much can change in cycling, especially when you don't expect it. So yeah, the UAE Tour was good fun and provided a better than expected result. I couldn't have written it better, and it really shows how important crosswinds can be. They don't appear often, but when they do, they can cause absolute carnage and make even the most basic of stages require your utmost attention. Omloop het Nieuwsblad. If you're Belgian, sorry. A cobbled one-day classic. This race became a top-level race just a few years ago now, and it's a fairly flat run with a couple of climbs and plenty of rough terrain. This is the first real cobbled race of the season as well, and in these races, even more so than others, stamina and fitness are so important. Many of my stronger riders came to this race with just okay fitness, but only 2 came in with strong RDC. I took a risk and decided to protect Cees Bol, a sprinter with a decent 73 in the cobbled stat, but he was worth backing due to his strong sprint and his +2 RDC. I thought if I could get enough riders to the end of a stage that we could lead Bol out to a decent finish. Turns out that everyone wanted to win this one, and attacks were rampant. I tried to attack with a couple of riders to no avail, but kept protecting Bol as much as I could without. Bol stayed with the lead group for a while until we reached the second to last cobble zone. Problem with Bol is he is a very poor climber, and the short steep climb that came at this point was just beyond him. He did manage to join a small group of other riders and they worked well together, and he then outsprinted them at the end to finish the race 10th, the first of the second group. Which isn't too bad. It's far from a disaster and a good sign going forward. In an ideal world, Feiderberg or Nice, who have much better cobbled stats, would have had a better RDC, so I could have had a few more options to play with. But considering how difficult these races can be, I'm quite satisfied with 10th. So this gives you a little bit of a taste of the gameplay loop of the career. In its simplest form, career is just a stretch of races connected with some emails in between them. But in reality it is so much more, and it's more about a narrative you create and the bond that grows between you and your riders. I will remember taking Romain Bardet to a surprise Tour of Spain win for a while. Heck, I still remember results I knocked in on PCM 2012, and I have yet to find a game that can have this effect on me. Career is where I spend most of my time in PCM, but there is one other big draw to this game, and that's what I'm going to chat about next. Be a Pro mode takes you away from team management and instead tasks you with controlling the career of one young cyclist. You can create the man yourself or randomly generate one. You can choose to raise the next Contador or to create a rider with less potential. If it's your first go, try and create a superstar. It's a nice power trip when a few seasons in you've created an unbeatable cyborg. The in-game pattern follows the same flavour as career, except it is far more streamlined. You choose which races on the condensed calendar you want your rider to participate in, because the team selects the bulk of the races and you choose from those races. But you are limited by the number of points you have available. You can earn more points by competing well in races, but in the earliest stages, that's really not all important. Your main focus should just be getting some okay results, improving your stats, and getting a contract for the next season. You'll need to prove yourself in the smaller races before being let loose on the Tour de France, and I do find the overall progression to be a little slow. In career, if you set your team up well, you'll have a chance in every stage with one rider or another. In Be a Pro, you may find yourself using the quick simulation option, which I haven't had the need to mention so far, where the AI generates the stage results, in order to skip the stages where you have no chance of a win or even a top 10. There is no real joy of riding a flat stage when you have a sprint of 56 and then a mountain of 75. But if you don't slog through these stages, you don't get the XP you need to improve your rider. It isn't a deal breaker, and a great deal of fun can be had in this mode, but even I'll admit that I don't sink as much time into this mode as I could. I suppose it could be a good palate cleanser from the career, but after almost 100 hours, I'm still finding joy from the career, so it doesn't apply to me just yet. The big selling point here are the skills you can allot to your rider. This is something a little unique and can change the gameplay up nicely when used correctly. They aren't completely game changing, but they do add a nice wrinkle to things. Acrobatic descending, for example, is fun to use but risky, as it increases your risk of falling. I forgot to mention falling. Falling is almost completely random in the game, and it can make or break a race. I think that by default the fall frequency is set a little high, and I tend to set it about 0.7 when I play. You can crank it up to 2.5 times if you have a screw loose and love suffering, but it is a nice mechanic nevertheless, and it's there for realism and for frustration, and it succeeds for both. I do like this mode, but I just don't play it all that much. I much prefer managing the whole kit and caboodle than just one single pawn. But it really is just a taste thing. My younger brother, for example, pretty much exclusively races in this mode, as he likes blasting through the seasons at a breakneck pace and ending up with their own special cyclist to take on the world's best. Single stages, and here I can be brief for a change. The single stage and tour modes are simply the races from the career as a single one-off option. It's the equivalent of a quick race in a driving game. It's handy if you want to practice your tactics or just want to compete in the Tour de France while tour fever is still rampant. Yeah, it's still the same fun gameplay from the other modes, except without the career tied together. It's a good. Track mode. Okay, this mode is more of a novelty than a serious way to experience the game. The game here shifts away from the road onto the track, and it is a completely different, if a little watered down experience. There is no big career option here, instead you choose a discipline, a rider, then you are put straight on the track. I'm going to quickly go through the disciplines. They are Keirin, where 6 riders are paced up to 50 km an hour. Once there are 3 laps of all-out racing. There's 1 to 5 rounds, first across the line, or the one with the most points after all the rounds wins. It's a decent discipline, but it's pretty short-lived and easy to win. 200 metre time trial, set the fastest time possible over 1 lap of the track. Pacing yourself is key. Awkward because you don't really know your opponent's time until the end, and you're simply guessing and hoping you're quick enough. Nice to have just a bit of extra information is all. Have a scratch race. 15 riders, 5 to 15 kilometres, first across the line wins. The simplest but also one of the more tactical, and I do enjoy doing this one now and again. Points race. This is the same as the scratch race, except sprints are held at certain intervals, and each sprint gives out points. The rider with the most points at the end wins, so it's not about finishing first, it's about finishing with the most points. It's really good fun and can be more chaotic and tactical than the others. If you can lap the field, you have truly mastered this mode. Sprint. 2 riders compete in multi-round sprints against one another, usually a best of rounds contest. Tactically engaging at first, but many races end up feeling the same. Okay if competing in a tournament style event, but it does get old rather quickly. The elimination race. 16 riders, every 2 laps the rider in last is eliminated, and the rider who remains at the end wins. Stamina management is important here, as you get nothing for being first until the final group. Fun, but it loses appeal fast like the other events. And finally the Omnium. This is a tournament with the points race, scratch race, 200 metre time trial and the elimination race. The rider with the most points after all 4 events wins. If I do play track mode these days, which is fairly rare, I tend to go for this one, as it feels meatier than the others. The controls here are simple, and once you figure out when to use the spacebar for maximum speed, you'll be winning these left, right and centre. I only play this occasionally and would welcome a revamp in this mode in next year's game. It's a nice extra, as the gameplay itself is fun in small bursts, but it would be nice with a more fully featured version. So yeah, track mode is fine, but nothing more than that. If they did flesh it out a little, giving you a calendar of races and end of season rankings and some sort of progression to tie things together, that could really improve this, as the gameplay, as I've said, is still enjoyable. So, in this video I've covered quite a lot about the game. I have actually left quite a lot out, like the average graphics, the average soundtrack, and the multiplayer mode that I've never touched. And there's other intricacies that I thought even that was a bit much to talk about for me. But let's be honest, those of you who are still watching at this point are probably inclined to try the game, or already have done so, and can discover the other nooks and crannies yourself. That means it's time for conclusion spiel. The biggest joy I feel when playing Pro Cycling Manager is from the stories the game creates. In my DSM save, I managed to steer perennial bridesmaid Romain Bardet to a couple of stage wins and a 6th overall in the Tour de France, before going to the Vuelta a España and wiping the floor with the competition. I remember the work that Martijn Tusveld did helping Romain, and the attack that almost brought Andreas Leknesson a stage win. These names may mean nothing to you, but when you win, or when you lose, I truly believe that you feel every emotion alongside the rider. And that, my friends, is the sign of an exceptional management game. Even Football Manager rarely elicits such an array of emotions when powering through a season. Pro Cycling Manager is the ultimate cycling experience in game form. They don't need to take big, bounding steps year on year, not because the developers are lazy, certainly not, but because the game is already so strong at its core. Sure, there are things that I wish were better, the music hasn't changed in years, and the presentation can still be improved further. The in-race graphics are nice, but are hardly blowing competition out of the water. But even in its current state, this game achieves more than enough for it to stay downloaded on my laptop all year round. I can't say that about many titles. I think Pro Cycling Manager 2022 is an exceptional game. Thanks for watching. Wagner out.